I cannot tell you how excited and honestly nervous I am to have this conversation.
I'm sure that a million people had a million different interpretations of me and what I was doing, and that's all fine.
There can't be one undisputed.
Yeah, it's one of the dumbest debates there ever
Right?
is, and everybody likes to engage in it, but I feel like I've generally been pretty misunderstood most of my life. But essentially, I distill it down to the simplest terms if I can, and that is, am I making a positive impact or not?
Thank you so much to STIFEL for all of your support. It has been so fun and so motivating to see the continued success of the STIFEL US ski team. The women's team has pretty strong lead in the Nations Cup standings in overall, downhill, giant slalom, and slalom, and we're second in Super G heading into this weekend's World Cup in Cron, Montana. I am super excited as well to have earned my 9th slalom globe with my win this last weekend in the Czech Republic. It's pretty crazy to be heading into the Olympics with the slalom globe already secured. And I'm just thankful to be here, to be racing this season, to be healthy, and absolutely so thankful to STIFEL for their support and help to make this success possible. STIFEL, where success meets success.
Okay, you guys. So this one I've been really looking forward to. Bode Miller is a personal hero of mine. And growing up, he was such a big inspiration to me and really still is. So let's kick off by rattling off some stats. The most successful American male alpine skier with 6 Olympic medals, including gold, 2 overall World Cup titles, 33 World Cup wins. The only American male skier to win in 5 disciplines: downhill, Super G, giant slalom, slalom, and combined. 2025 U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Hall of Fame inductee. 1996 Maine State Tennis Singles Champion. And most of all, he's built a beautiful family with his wife, Morgan, and their 8 children. So Bode, I cannot tell you how excited and honestly nervous I am to have this conversation. Thank you for joining me today. You already know this. You've been such a big inspiration to me since I was a little girl, and I'm so grateful to you for that, because I don't really know how I would have actually continued to pursue this sport without you. So I don't know if there's actually a more perfect guest for this show. Sorry, Alex, to help shed some light on all the varying degrees of what the point is. So thank you for joining and welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely.
We can just dive right into the first segment, which is it's a rapid fire, the Faster.Always rapid fire. Something that I'm not particularly good at, but we're going to try to keep this quick. Can you describe the feeling of a perfect turn to somebody who knows nothing about ski racing?
Yeah, I think starts with like a little bit of fear and a bunch of enthusiasm or optimism kind of mixed all together, and then full commitment without any sort of reaction to that fear. It's like a recognition, but then full commitment straight past it into the action, and then kind of the medium of surprise and like enthusiasm as the turn is going and questioning whether it's actually going to hold or work. And then usually surprise and excitement and sort of elation afterwards. I think of that turn in Sochi at the top of the downhill. There's kind of a bank turn. And that was, if I had to pick one, I'd say that was, but it was only in the training run. In the race, I kind of tanked it. But in the training run, it was, I would say, the best turn I've ever made, and the most surprising. Like afterwards, you're kind of like, it's hard to even recognize what happened because it all is so close to the edge of what, what works and what doesn't work.
That's so wild that you like have a specific one in mind. That's so cool. Oh, did you have a favorite track on the World Cup circuit?
I mean, I guess I kind of did. I always, whenever we're going to Schladming, I liked it. It's hard to relate whether that was because we were done with Wengen and Kitzbühel or whether it was because it was Schladming. But I like that night slalom and had some really cool memories there, both winning and just kind of the way that I skied and that atmosphere and the culture around that. I really liked, but at different times I had favorite tracks that were all over. I mean, there was times where I really looked forward to Bormio, which is I'm probably the only person to ever have said that, because that hill is pretty gnarly. But there's just, again, places where I could do things that I really liked to do, and that I didn't have that many other places where it stacked up that way.
But you and Dom Paris are the only two I've ever was looking forward to Born for different reasons. I think I think he actually just enjoys the rattle of it. Do you have a favorite piece of advice that you have told your kids to this point?
They don't listen to me.
I doubt that.
Yeah, I think, for me, especially, with five boys, and actually, ironically, my daughter, Scarlett, who's only 4, is the one who kind of, I think, actually picks up on it the most. And I'm hoping it stays with her, which is like, it's like, I tell them about integrity and I try to describe the words because, like a lot of the words that we would use as adults, a lot of little kids they don't have an intrinsic meaning to them at all. So I try to like lump that in. It means like good manners, honor, like, being respectful, and like kind of I stack in all the other ones. And then they always ask like what those mean. They break down, like, okay, well, what does that one mean? Which little kids love to do. Okay, well, it's like the what if game.
But why?
Yeah, but why? And I think, that's probably my most important, just because obviously they're little, and I think it helps when you have some framework when you're small to like work with as you move through different situations. So that's probably the most common, and just kind of letting them understand what it feels like to have that and to like express it and not have to be recognized necessarily for it. So
that's awesome. What's your favorite meal in the world?
There's a sandwich shop in New Hampshire called Gold House, and they make a hot turkey sub that's it's the best sandwich I've ever had. And I think sandwiches are my most I wouldn't say maybe my favorite, but they're like the thing that I envision if I had to pick one genre. That's it, because you can do everything with a sandwich. So and every time I go there, that's sort of one of my first stops, and it has the nostalgia of growing up with it as well, but it's just a really good sandwich.
Is there something that you feel like people have misunderstood or currently misunderstand about you that you would like, if you could just like put information into the world and just have people get it, would there be one thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I feel like I've generally been pretty misunderstood most of my life, but I think I have a pretty unique approach to why I do things. The why has always been much more important than I think people think. I think a lot of my the interpretation of actions and stuff seem kind of impulsive, or whatever is driven by other motivation is sort of an undercurrent of everyone's life, right? And I think that's probably one of the most commonly misunderstood things. If you were to pick 1,000 people, we can see things they do, but probably we'd be wrong about most of the why of that. So I mean, I think that's probably it. I know that's pretty vague, but
we can get into that.
The why of why I communicated with my family the way I did, and why I wanted to be a ski racer, and sort of all that stuff is all. I don't think my family really understood why I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and so I think it's still pretty active at this point.
All right, well, let's get into some of those whys. You are one of the most well-rounded athletes in the history of our sport. You grew up playing soccer and tennis, skiing, golf. You attempted to qualify for the US Open at one point. What brought you to skiing above other sports?
I mean, from a young age, it was the expression part of it. Like there was a bunch of things that were unique about skiing that I liked, but ultimately what allowed me to stay with it was the expression. Like I could I could really be myself as purely as I possibly could, more so than I could in school or doing work or with my family or playing soccer or tennis. Like tennis had appeal to me when I was young because there was parts of it that were that way where I was like just out there, but the fact that everything depended on another player on the other side of the net and how they were reacting and how they were playing a shot, that sort of ultimately limited my expression in tennis. And I felt like that was really important to me. Like I needed something. It's almost like drawing or painting or something like that, where you can kind of put your inner bits out and have them be seen and not, not hold back on that. I think that's a huge motivator for people who play music or do art. And I suck at both those things. And even though I suppose I tried at different times to do different things that way, it was really clear to me that was a huge part of just an internal process and desire. Like if I wanted to grow, if I wanted to engage, I needed to express myself. And skiing for me that's I think one of the things that I tried to express over my career was that like my motivation wasn't about trying to win races, even though I wanted to. That was a great byproduct of skiing well or doing things right. But the expression was by far the highest priority. So I didn't, and that's why I got into a bunch of trouble. I was actually just talking, somebody asked me about when I quit the first time in Val d'Isere, the World Championships. And the reason I quit was because I expressed myself and had gotten just my ass handed to me over and over again that season. And the other people that I was racing with, I could just see that they were just so restrained. So like, I don't know, not their authentic self, not their best self. And they were winning. And it was like, it just
do that?
It just hurt my feelings, I think, in the deepest way. And I sat on the side after I had won the combined downhill by like a ton, and I was beating Axel by, I don't know, almost 3 seconds or something. All I had to do was like snowplow down the slalom. I was actually skiing pretty good slalom that moment. And I wanted to do what I do, which is express myself and try to pin a slalom. And I hooked a tip and I sat on the side of the hill and pouted for like 10 minutes and then quit. And that's like, it should say something to you. If I pout and then quit, that's not my natural reaction to that type of thing. But that I think is like a good example of like where expression, how important it was, because that's an obvious example. Like if I didn't have that as my top priority, I would have been so easy to win a gold at that World Championships. Like, I can ski conservative slalom, despite everyone's probably belief that I can't. I can. It just sucks and it's really slow, and I don't want to be 2 seconds slower than I can be to win a gold. That doesn't feel right to me.
So how do you feel about AI?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah. Are you like strongly against it, strongly for it, or neutral?
I don't think I fit into any of those categories. I'm skeptical of its impact on culture and humanity in the world. It just seems very in line with like Terminator in a lot of ways. Like totally. I'm old enough where I've seen movies really kind of manifest and come around, and so that's kind of a discouraging outcome for that, considering that I have a bunch of kids, and even if it happens after I'm old and dead or whatever, I don't want my kids to have to be fighting Terminator. So, I think we're a weird species that way. I think we can't help it. So I don't really blame anybody. I'm not like against it, because I just think that would be so against our human nature. Like we just try to make better stuff all the time. It's like the one thing we can't help. But yeah, it is a little bit scary. And I think it's also strange, the timing of it. But I think to a degree, I like it because it drives such a demand for electricity, and we just don't have that kind of capacity right now. And of course, what I see is the typical, like, just ramp up the current situations. And but I think it leads to driving a lot of positive initiatives, right? Like just the use of it in its own right, I think will help to develop new modalities and things to to make life better. But I also think it'll force people outside of that space to actually address energy needs in a different way, which sometimes, as we were saying, motivation is like the big thing. And the companies that do energy management right now, they're not super motivated to do improvements, because the more the drain is on the current infrastructure, it's a price to demand thing, and they just get to make more money. So they're almost de-incentivized to improve. But now there's this new, all of a sudden kind of spring up like a massive new demand on energy. And I think that'll push us into some new stuff. So.
Okay. That was like way more interesting than I anticipated. I'm gonna bring it back down to like a much more layman's level. Mm-hmm. Plugging into AI to best describe you as a human. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't like, please don't ask AI what it thinks about me. But basically, there's like descriptive words for you, and you've heard these: unconventional, aggressiveness, fearless, authentic, iconoclast, known for unique daredevil style, relentless pursuit of speed, revolutionary, divisive figure in skiing. I'm curious, in these terminologies, there's a lot of talk about your style being very fearless. Were you actually fearless?
No, not at all. I mean, I think there's some basic, I think, understandings of terminology that are critical to communication, right? I mean, that was, if you ask anyone who I raced with, that was one of the things I felt really strongly about, was developing vocabulary through over time with examples, because words are insufficient for really trying to communicate anything beyond basic stuff. Like, if you want some water, that works, right? Like if you're sad, even, is like a perfect example, right? If you're sad is like a very short word, and it's very subjective. It means lots of different things. So, I mean, I would say that fear to me is a really important natural reaction to danger, right? Like, and it creeps into every other area of your life, but it takes a bit of time and energy and discipline to start to categorize and control or manage your fear into a more functional, sort of, call it, platform, which for me was, I was afraid when I was racing because I was pretty rickety and I crashed a lot. And so there was fear based on outcomes of that and how to manage that. But I wasn't, it was always sort of directly correlated to danger. Like, if there was danger, then I was fearful. And like, I developed that really young, when I was walking up to my house in the woods, and I would be afraid. And then I would try to like figure that out and be like, is there danger here? Or is this just like in my head? Am I afraid of something that's imaginary? And I think that was helpful for me, because it put things into some framework, whereas like I could start to actually logically think about the danger factor, and then anything that wasn't in that danger category, I was like, okay, well, this is probably just in my head, or I'm imagining something that's in the future that probably isn't going to happen. And that allowed me to be, I think, much more stable through a lot of situations that could have been distracting. And ultimately, it ends up being about efficiency. Like, if you're worried and fear is a big part of your life, you get distracted all the time, and you can't put the energy into things that are a bit more productive. You end up kind of fixating on scary things or things that you're afraid of. And I didn't waste a lot of time with that, which I was proud of.
You told me that last year when I was coming back, and you sent me some messages. It was like, when you're in the start gate, remind yourself that you're okay right now. I don't know if that's like, so that's something you kind of developed when you were already that young, walking up a mile and a half to your house in the dark or whatever. Like,
yeah. And it's, most of the stuff that I think matters, you develop outside of skiing. I mean, skiing is great for teaching a lot of different things, but it's also great for exposing a lot of different things. And so ideally you have some frameworks to deal with those before you actually have to experience them. I think that's a huge thing that we deal with as Americans, is that we don't typically have a lot of framework for that. I mean, if you think of guys like, Novak Djokovic, right, who grew up in kind of a war-torn country, right? He has all these things that like already frame the way he sees the world and how he deals with things, how he deals with challenges, and how he deals with disappointment and failure and all that. So then when he gets to a certain level, all of a sudden he's like, oh wait, as long as he can make the connection of like, this is very similar to like what I was dealing with as a kid, just in two totally different frameworks, but the experience is the same. A lot of times you'll see those people really be able to pass through barrier points or sticking points that other athletes will really get stuck on because they have no framework to sort of think about it. And a lot of times inside the sport, it's really challenging to actually learn those lessons or develop the frameworks.
That's so interesting. Sorry, just processing here. Do you feel like there's a way to take life situations that, like if you talk about, some of it is maybe talking about like privilege, and if you're growing up in maybe a little bit more of a privileged form versus not, or maybe that's not the right term for it, but like if you're in a situation growing up as a kid where you're not necessarily getting exposure, do you think there's a way to like know that and use opportunities to like grow that part of your mindset? Or is it just like you are exposed to what you're exposed to, and so you'll have the capacity to handle things in the future or not?
No, I think it certainly helps if it's real, and if it's involuntary, because that's the nature of most of adulting is that you face things and they're not like in a controlled environment. They're not imaginary. They're like real tangible things in your face. And, but I do think that it's all subjective, really. I mean, like how I dealt with walking up through the woods, other kids could deal with about the creature monster under their bed or in their closet or they, it's all relative. It doesn't, I mean, I do think there's advantages to, for instance, the way that I grew up, because it was very tangible and it was kind of, there was repetition to it, and it was paired with all the sort of independence or self-reliance or freedom that I also had. So I kind of just naturally had a pathway to feeling like I had to do it on my own. And like I had to, it wasn't like I could rely on other people just by its nature. Whereas if you have an animal under your bed or, you're afraid of it, you could do the same thing, but it's also really easy or kind of common to like, be like, Mom, Dad, like there's a thing under my bed, right? Like, or you think there is, you see what I'm saying? So like there's the capability is there in any circumstance to do exactly what I'm saying. Like anybody could do it, but you'd have to be a little bit more proactive, or you'd have to kind of like maybe use your imagination a little bit more and kind of like pair other things together. Whereas there are circumstances where it's involuntary. It's just, that's how it is. And you're going to deal with it one way or another.
Yeah, totally. Looking back on your skiing career, do you have anything in your mind that sticks out as like a biggest accomplishment or biggest failure?
But first, a word for our partner, the Cher Winter Foundation.
I know firsthand that no athlete gets here alone. Champions don't rise without support, coaches and teammates, and a whole community behind them. That's why I'm so proud to support Cher Winter Foundation. They're giving thousands of kids the chance to click into skis or strap on a snowboard for the first time ever. For these kids, it's not about medals. It's about confidence and belonging and a joy for being in the snow. Every athlete has people in their corner, and every kid should too. Learn more at sharewinterfoundation.org/MickGives.
I think probably, the thing that I wouldn't say it's an accomplishment directly, but the thing that I'm probably the most sort of that I reflect on, that I'm the most proud of maybe, is just of, that can create from coaches who are, not mean. They're just dealing with the situation, right? They're saying like, what are you doing? And like, you got to stop doing this. And at the same time, like I said, my motivation was really clear for me, but it was impossible to describe to them in a way that could help them really understand it and get them on board. So to stick to what I knew was the right path, in the face of that kind of mounting evidence that I was on the wrong path, I would say that, but I knew it was the right one. And those are like really, really important pressure tests, or like, it helps to galvanize your kind of mindset or what you truly believe in. And, those moments you question, like, I'm not, stiff enough, or like, you're in the moment. There's no way to know if where you're headed is actually a positive place, or if you're doing it right, or if you should try something else. And so all you can rely on is like, how thorough have you been with your analysis? How much do you truly believe? And then, you're in that moment where it's like, you have to make decisions. And I was proud of the fact that I was able to navigate that, because it is really tough. I mean, every person deals with that in every area of their life, where there's outside pressures, and you might, even if it's even if it's something smaller, like some of the stuff I was talking about was pretty major stuff. When I wanted to start racing the speed events, I was like, that's going to help my slalom. And they were like, no, that's not how that works. And I was like, it is for me. It is for me. Trust me, it will help. And they were like, no. And then, I think it really did help. And, there's a bunch of those that I felt like those were the most testing moments of my actual career.
Okay, so that opened up a whole nother world. I gotta like kind of stay on track, but also, what do you see as like the greatest similarity between a downhill turn and a slalom turn?
I think just
like mindset based.
Yeah, just like I was saying, like the ability to commit to something, and like you have to make an assessment first. Like, what is my ability? What's my equipment? What's the surface? Like, how hard can I push on this particular spot? And then it takes that commitment. And the problem with slalom is it's so quick and so reactionary that you don't have a lot of compressed time. Everything's hyper compressed there. So, you tend to, have to be more reactionary and kind of rely on historical successes, or, how you judge how hard you drop in and what's going to happen to the gate hitting your ski, and just all, there's a lot of different factors that happen in a really short period of time. Whereas downhill, you have more space. There's more time. You're going much faster. But there's a ton of similarities. But the way you can kind of react in downhill through a turn that might in some cases last a second or 2 seconds, or even 3 or 4 seconds, is so different than a slalom turn, which lasts a few tenths of a second in most cases. So that's what really helped me, was just kind of like honing in that part and being able to like feel out the adjustments that could be made both as the initiation, but in the turn too. And like, when that happened, it didn't just help my slalom in and of itself. It helped me to make decisions about slalom, like that's when I switched to Fisher, right? Like, and when I switched to Fisher, it was because I knew that I needed a setup that worked differently than what I had, because it's just what I was doing it was fine. It was fast. I could go super fast. I won some runs and stuff, but it just was too unreliable. Like, there was too many variables in there.
Totally.
And I needed longer turns to sort of figure out where that reliability, like, was it me and I just needed to get better, or was it truly about my equipment? And right or wrong, I discovered pretty quickly that it was, a lot of that was equipment based. It was like, sure, there was both. Like, I needed to get better too, but there was a piece of my equipment and the way it interacted where it just was making it much, much harder than it needed to be.
Yeah. Just like better understanding all the different breakdowns of a turn, whether it's short or long, makes a difference, because you're still just playing with gravity, basically.
Yep. And inertia and balance.
Is there anything that you kind of know now, looking back on your career, that you wish you had known then? Or like, would you change anything?
I don't know. I mean, some of that piece that I was just talking about which times I switched to which equipment, that was really, those were challenging. Those were probably, besides the sort of pressure test of like knowing what I had to do, but those are kind of almost lumped together, because again, when I switched to Fisher, that was a bit easier, because most of the sort of inertia train of coaches and everybody was like, yeah, you need to not be on K2, which I loved K2. I loved K2, and I liked the guys I was working with.
Changed.
And but that was pretty uniform. Everybody was like, yeah, you're not doing yourself any favors there. So that was easier. But then the switch to Rossignol was met with huge resistance, because it was just the GS ski. That's the only reason I switched. Their slalom ski was much worse than Fisher. Everybody argued that the GS ski wasn't even better than the Fisher GS ski. No one was blowing everyone out of the water on the Rossignol ski, and I was winning on Fisher. So, and the switch to Atomic was also really challenging. It was a huge pay cut, and I had awesome offers other places with skis that were great in 5 events. So it was kind of, those were, I think, I wouldn't change them, but you know, it would be nice to see into the future, I guess, and then like be able to judge that, because obviously those are times where I was getting better anyway. And like, it's easy to equate the switches to the successes that I had. But at the same time, in hindsight, for me personally, there's other things that would have been interesting as well within that.
Yeah. I think always with switching equipment, like it can go the other direction too. But when you've got an idea of what you need in your head and you sort of know what the equipment has to offer, then it's a risk for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the Rosignol switch, because Fisher had pretty good speed skis. Like they were getting better, but the slalom GS skis were really competitive. Like I was, you know, I'd won in both those events, and you know, to switch to a company that really only had one, and it was just that one batch. I know you've probably heard that story of just that batch of GS skis. Every other GS ski they had was pretty crappy. So it was compounded. Like I was relying on, I was basically switching to win the GS title. But it was also because of the timing of everything. Like the GS field at that time, if you look at those years, it was just an unbelievable GS field. It was the deepest GS field I've ever seen. And there was like 5 or 6 guys who were at the exact level, you know, that you would say is like superlative. I mean, that's unusual, right? Like now Odermatt's kind of in his own field, and like you'll see guys poke in there here and there. This was like 5 or 6 guys who were doing what they do better than everybody else, all doing it at the same time. It was Herman, Benny, you know, Von Groningen, Nyberg and Kovali, and there was like from a bunch of different countries. Everybody, you know, even Schuss, like everybody had these kind of sort of high moments where on a certain course they were basically unbeatable. And I was like, I want to win the GS title because I think it's the hardest event, it's the most challenging, and it's the most expressive for me. And so I literally put like all my eggs in that one basket, and that felt pretty risky. And it was good that it worked, I guess, but it was it was risky.
Would have been nice to know when. So what feels different? Like, where do you place winning a GS title? Let's take that. Or a globe, a season title, versus like winning a race. And what I mean by that is like, when you talk about expressing yourself and winning races seems like, I don't know, it kind of takes you out of that moment. And you can do, like you said, you can ski conservative. You can do so many different things to win a race, but then you walk away and like, that would have been just wildly unsatisfying based off like the way you thought about it. But then how do you see how a globe, a season title fits into self-expression? Yeah,
those are different. I mean, you can't make sort of unilateral statements about those because they're so different. Like that GS title was awesome because the way the skis let me ski was so different and expressive. Like it started off right first thing in the year in Solden, and I could just like, I had 2 different turns and I could just like play with what I wanted to do. On my right side, I could drift and I could come in super direct and I could drop straight into ruts and straight into chatters and shit that looked horrible. And like in the past, I'd either blow a ski off or just chatter until I was like outside of all that and then try to like come back from super late. And in this case, I could just go super direct and just drop in and like pin and come out ahead of everybody else and then arc completely clean on the other side, because my left foot was always edgier and I didn't mess with it. And everybody was like, Hubert was like, you gotta take some edge away from that. It's obviously super aggressive on that side. And I was like, no, I like that. If I'm late, I'll just make it up on my right turn. But it was so cool to be able to, on the face of Solden, for instance, like it was pretty chattery and pretty chundered up. Yeah. I could straight arc a turn, like a perfectly like on the steepest part of the pitch, drop in and arc a turn, and anybody could do that, but they'd be going so fast by the next gate.
You could do one, maybe, no chance.
You couldn't do 2. And like, even if you did one, you know, keep in mind, Solden has changed a lot. The top of that, when I was racing at the breakover onto the pitch, was like 60, 70 feet higher and
it's
way
mellowed
steeper.
Out so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, they used to set it much bigger distance. I mean, we were going, 60 miles an hour at the bottom of that. So it was like that to me was it was the most expressive. So that title, I would say probably as a title means the most to me, just because it was the whole year and I won a bunch of races, but every race that I didn't win, I was still, like I said, I was competing against guys who were at the very, very top of their game, doing things that I just couldn't do. I mean, several times that year I came down and was like, oh my God, that's it. I just killed it. Like it's over. And then I'd end up third or fourth. And I was like, whoa, that's like, good job, guys. Like, because I knew I had better stuff than everybody. I mean, I was probably the, 14th best GS skier, in the field that year, but I had better equipment and I understood my equipment better. And I think also the fact that it allowed me to express myself, it sort of maximized what I had to offer at that moment. But that means the most. But in general, it was the actual moments, the little moments, not the end titles. Because I won titles in other events at different times that didn't really feel like they held much meaning. Because at one time or another, either I was just out of it mentally, or the setup wasn't there, and I just kind of like turded my way down and ended up with a result that led me to winning a title. But every year, I mean, I never went any years where I didn't really feel, really good about certain races, certain spots.
I'm just, in all of this, I'm like also thinking about my own, my own experiences.
Well, that's the great thing, is it's different for everybody, right? Like, I think there's no doubt that you have expression in your skiing. Like there's, everybody does, but it's more just a matter of for your own personal, you play music. So maybe you don't need it the way I did. Like maybe if I could play the drums or whatever, maybe I wouldn't have skied the way I did, but like it was what I needed. So I used it.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes where I struggle is like wanting to have the most pure run, to not take any speed off the turns. I like rarely do that. Some of it is fear. Like if I don't know that I can handle the highest speed or highest force turn, maybe that's the question mark. Definitely some of it is like the fear of like not performing. Sometimes it's also like if I have a lead and I don't want to lose that lead in the second run, and how embarrassing would it be to lose it? That can also be motivation to ski faster. But in my ideal world, it would be like just so clearly only my best skiing, only my best turns all the time, which might not always win. Did you feel like if you skied the way you wanted to ski, it would be the fastest? Or was that just like you just maximize your own potential and it might not be the fastest, but you'd know that it was your best?
Yeah, the potential for me was the fastest. The reality was, and it's the same thing you were dealing with. I just dealt with it in a sort of different, different scale, I guess, because what I was trying to do was essentially what I believed was my fastest skiing every time, or almost every time. But the outcomes of that were all over the place. And so like if you looked at from actual objective fast, right, to start to finish, the way I was trying to do it led to much more error and mistakes. And, so was it overall faster? No. If I could go back and switch little parts and not ski the way that I want to ski because it didn't work out. If it all worked out perfectly, yeah, it was what I was trying to do was the fastest way that I could go. But it almost never works out that way. So there's always pieces that if you could go back, you could swap out a little less risky or a little bit different tactics and ultimately be faster. But that's the difference between expressing yourself through that and trying to get the fastest time. And so, the problem is you don't know. There's no way to know until, so, and I think you have a little bit of a disadvantage in that you have so much repetition of having success and of sort of putting together stacks of really good turns in a row that maybe they're not your maximum, but they're already, you're preemptively doing what I'm saying. You're just adjusting slightly and the, I think that's the way you win 100 and whatever races you've won. Like you do it in a smart, tactical way where you're still going faster than everybody else, but you're managing it better. And that's a disadvantage in the sense that when you try to actually find the highest gear where you're ultimately right on the line, you don't really know where that is. Like you said, you just don't know how hard you can push, because I always thought of it like, if in training, if I wasn't crashing like at least once or twice a day training, that I wasn't finding that limit, because ultimately the crash is the byproduct of pushing the limit one way or the other. It's either your technique, your tactics, your equipment, or the snow or whatever. That's what leads to the crash. So, if I wasn't doing that, then I was afraid that I was dropping below knowing that limit, and knowing that limit is how you find it all the time. But again, crashing sucks. I just happen
I'm like
to be
putting my.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, and like, they aren't gentle. I mean, you've seen my crashes. They're not like, it's not like, ooh, okay, up we go. A lot of the time, like in training, I had crashes that just like, get the wind knocked out of you and get smashed around. Even slalom. I mean, slalom crashes can be horrible.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And you just have to, it like that's all part of it. Like I said, I think I had a pretty authentic view of like who I was, what I was capable of, where my strengths were, where my weaknesses were. And I kind of managed that the best I could. And like the one thing I was really, really good at, like maybe better than anybody, was being durable. Like I could crash harder and more than everybody else and not hurt myself. And if I wasn't that, I think I would have figured it out pretty early and changed entirely my tactics. But because that was like sort of my superpower, I always could kind of continue to push, and I got more out of myself than I think I would have another way.
Yeah. I can totally see that. This is where you might want to plug your ears. Maybe not. But I think kind of for context for anybody listening, I've mentioned this before, it, including at the STIFEL US Ski Team Gala last year in Vail. You are one of the main reasons that I pursued ski racing. And when I was like 13 or 14 years old, I was training at home, at my home mountain in November, and the whole ski team was there. And I got in the lift line behind you and realized it was you, and full panicked, like clicked out of my skis, and I think ran the opposite direction, with like kids don't really do these days. They just like run up to you and ask for things. I was just like, holy shit. And the rest of the day, my like radar was up, and not to ask for anything. It was just like to appreciate your presence in person. You'd ski under the chairlift in Vail, and it'd be like, there he is, just like making that turn, and understanding what it is to do to like manage forces in that way in person was a really cool lesson for me at that age. It was a really cool gift.
Was that at Gold Peak?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, you could correct me, I think it was one of the first years that the ski team was kind of training in that area early season. So it was this incredible opportunity that, if I was 5 years older, I just like wouldn't have had it at that time. And it was kind of a pivotal moment to be like, whoa, I get to see this in person. I've seen it on TV. Like, and I think it's cool that your goal of self-expression, and to do it, I'm assuming that you're looking for that in training, you're looking for that in races, and in a way there's no difference. So giving unknowingly, like I had the chance to witness that in person in the same way that you might have done it in a race. I don't know. That was cool. You don't have to comment on that.
No, but you're touching on the exact reason why it's so important, and the difference between doing it for like skiing to win a race and skiing to express. The whole reason for that is because when you ski to win a race, it doesn't mean you don't inspire people. It doesn't mean you don't have a connection, but there's something uniquely human about connecting to somebody who is openly expressing themselves, right? That's why music is so compelling, right? Is when you see somebody out there just like really letting it go. that's compelling. It's a human to human connection. Even though you might be in a crowd of 10,000 people or more or whatever, you can feel a direct connection to the person who's expressing themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that person is connected to everybody else. And, human connection is probably the most important thing there is. So I think, it was in training, it was in races for me. And it maybe wasn't as enough in other areas of my life. Like I said, like if I'd been in a better drawer when I was little or whatever, but, that is exactly the reason for it. And it wasn't just for you. I'm not doing it for, I'm not doing it for
totally.
the kids who might be watching or the coaches. I'm doing it for myself, but the feeling that you get when you're doing it well is completely about everybody else as well. It's about contributing. You're contributing something. I don't know what it is. You're contributing your authentic expression to the world, really. And it does work even when you're by yourself. Like, people sense it. I don't know where inspiration comes from. If you're just sitting by yourself and you feel inspired to write a song or draw a picture or do a workout, but you could assume that if you believe in sort of the collective, that inspiration is coming from people contributing their best effort to that somewhere else in the world, right? It's just like they're contributing to a global circuit, and then you're somehow plugged into that circuit and you're getting inspiration from them, whether you're witnessing it or not.
Well, I feel like when you talk about that connect, I mean, I struggle to believe like how the universe can sway one way or the other, but there's certain moments in my life that have given me reason to believe that that you can actually be guided by connection, by something that's going on our planet or greater. It has guided me through pretty key moments. And one of them was in Vail, in this moment that I got to watch you just training, and I could just appreciate it and didn't need to ask for something from there. That was enough. Developing my own determination in this sport. At the Munich airport, when my mom and I were returning home to say bye to my dad, you were there unknowingly. That those kind of moments, I think if I hadn't seen you in Vail training, it wouldn't have been as impactful to cross paths in the airport in Munich. Mm-hmm. But also showing the world of how important it is to just follow the path that's meaningful to you, even when it is outside of the normal maybe definition of success. And it doesn't have to really be understood. That's been really powerful. And also witnessing you and Morgan and your family work through grief on a world stage. That's another example of something that's been incredibly guiding for me that might not have had as much of an impact without those previous moments. I don't know if that's kind of fits into what you think about when you think of connection, but
yeah. Have you read The Alchemist? Paulo Coelho?
No, I haven't read it, but
I just listened to it. It's really short. I mean, you can hammer through it really quickly, but I listened to it on the way up here, trying to get my kids to listen to it. Of course, they keep playing on their iPads or whatever, but I've probably read that book at least 10 times. But every time you read it at different phases of your life, you get different things from it. It's really just kind of an entertaining story, but it has so much value in the way that it sort of outlines exactly what you're talking about the, it's basically, if you're pursuing your personal legend, which is sort of like your destiny, but it's your highest aspirational whatever. And that everything conspires to help you with that. But it doesn't do it for you. And it doesn't mean it's smooth. It means that when you look backwards, you can see the line connecting all these different kind of high points, challenges, circumstances that then lead to the next stop, to the next stop, to the next stop. And I think it requires, I'm not, inherently religious in any context, but that is a spiritual sort of belief that there is connecting dots that you have to trust in, and you have to be but it also gives you sort of fortitude. It gives you, it gives you the ability to tolerate things that maybe would be challenging or hard or make you want to steer in a different direction. And have those, but ultimately it comes down to those little, like those crux moments, the linchpin things that like where you make a decision one way or the other. And as you're saying, a lot of the stuff, when you have those moments, it's helpful just to kind of like do a quick overview of looking backwards, because then you can have that moment where you see all the dots connect and you're like, okay, all right, this is when I got to like pay attention to my heart and like listen to what makes sense to me and not get distracted by the outside stuff, because those are the tests. The tests are typically a lot of outside influence telling you one thing, or like your fear telling you one thing, and they all kind of tend to lean one direction. And, there is an element of defiance that's necessary, but there's also, it's more just like courage or like fortitude, basically, is where you like can find your center and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then in hindsight, when you look back, those are the next dot, those are the next dot that set you up for the whole, rest of your experience. And yeah, I think it's crazy. And it's not lost on me exactly what you're saying, that like an early experience, and a lot of times it's hard to even draw the connections to the experiences that happen before that, because a lot of times the big dots are like, they kind of overwhelm you and you're like, whoa, that was a pivotal moment. But then you'll find that there's like 10 more dots before that all happened and that got you there, that then moved it forward.
Yeah. No, it's so true. There's so many things I want to be like respectful of your time as well. Okay, so there's this moment that I saw it in Flying Downhill. Like that's my most watched movie of all time. And I think it was like maybe Olympics, maybe a World Championships, but in the finish line of some big race, you won, and you didn't like celebrate like people celebrate. Like you won the race and you weren't like arms up, whatever, shouting in victory. You knelt down, rested your head on your skis. And I felt like that moment was like so quiet and like internalized. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you, I feel like moments of victory, or like moments when you feel that you've done the best you can, any level of like something that feels like a personal victory, they can vary. But was there sort of a victory celebration that felt the most you?
I mean, they all were me, but yeah, I think that one, was World Championships in St. Moritz, and that one was particularly powerful for me because it really did. It changed. It was a demonstration of exactly what you were saying. Kind of like not so much the dots connecting, but the universe like demanding an outcome, and us being sort of secondary to that outcome in a way. Like I did what I did, right? And if I'd done something different, it would have been different. Of course, if I'd hooked a tip, I'm out. Or but I was 3 seconds behind in the downhill, and I'd been skiing good downhill, and then my slalom skis were pretty marginal, and I crushed 2 runs of slalom. I lost my pole in one of the runs, way up at the top. So I skied like most of the slalom run with 1 pole, which is not helpful.
Not
at all.
Recommended.
But when I came, it was unbelievably tight after 3.5 minutes of racing. Like it was all just hundredths. And that when I was in the finish area, and I was just kind of enjoying my own thing, right? Like, and that was a great example of not being overly concerned that I was 3 seconds out. Like everybody else was super bummed, and they were like, "Oh, you're out of it. You're not going to win a medal.
Yeah, you have no chance."
Yeah, but I was like, I didn't really. It's easy to say it in past tense because I ended up winning. But like the reality was in that moment, I was like, no, this is, I don't care about that. I get to run 2 runs of slalom now on marginal equipment, and I'm going to absolutely go apeshit and like see what I can do. Right. Like, what are you going to do? Like that, it wouldn't matter if I was ahead or behind. Like, that's what I mean about sort of my galvanized position at that moment was really good. So I ended up like, in defiance of reality, I was like, no, it wasn't that I thought I was going to win. It was that I was going to go maximum effort and see what I could do. And I lost a pole. And, when you lose a pole, it's easy to be like, okay, well, now I got to ski a little bit more conservative because my balance isn't that great in slalom anyway. And with 1 pole, but but there's turns in that course where you'll see where boot topped harder with no pull to cross block, harder than I had on those skis in the last 2 years. So, and I came down and it was witnessing, it was almost like a like little breadcrumb of like, okay, well, you know, that was it, like the universe. If you could put context to like us in the universe, it was like, okay, that was pretty impressive that you were able to do that under the, not the performance, but the belief system and the output, like what I could control. And so it like bent reality. I mean, the last two guys that came down were Shus and Amat, and they literally were like stuck in the mud. If you watch that race, as they're trying to get to the finish, it was like the air thickened around them. It was like there was no wind. There was no wind, but it was like there was like a 20 mile an hour. Yeah, it was like there was like a 20 mile an hour headwind, and they were battling it, and it was just enough to put them hundredths of a second behind me. And and it just, because, and it wasn't, I wasn't reading reality, I was just feeling it. It was like I could feel this energetic like manipulation in a way, and that just it shocked me. But it also, you know, it's humbling. You feel really small, and it wasn't doing it for me, it was doing it for itself. Like the universe was like, that's what needed to happen, and so it did it. And it was like I was just a little tiny piece in that whole big sort of tapestry, and it was crazy. It was yeah, super powerful. And I wanted to sort of recognize that and like engage with it in my own way, which precluded any kind of a rah-rah Jean-Pierre Vidal celebration. I just had to sit there and like kind of breathe through it and cry. I mean, that's what happens to me in those situations. It's like when it's that powerful, you're just like overwhelmed. But and then I would say in the GS, the same series, that was just clean, but it was also totally different. Like no one went through the molasses. There wasn't any manipulation. It just happened. And it was, you know, that was the 400ths where Schlopie was third and I was first, and, you know, 400ths of a second on the podium. And, you know, those are two totally different experiences, even though the outcome looks the same. I won and it was very tight and like whatever. Though you couldn't be almost further apart. One was just good skiing with nothing else, and the other one was like a spiritual experience that it reinforced my belief system.
That's wild. How do you think about the sort of the very clear tangibility of the sport when time-based and the point is to win, sort of, but then within that, there's your own different experience, which sometimes is so moving that it's completely outside. It really is completely outside of the result. And that's what you're shooting for. But like, have you ever been able to like accurately explain to somebody what it is like to be 400ths of a second apart from a teammate that you've been training with? And they're both podiums. It's a win. But just what a different experience that could be.
Well, I think I tried.
Do you think people get it?
I tried there. No, I don't think they do. But I mean, again, the point that I was sort of poking at is that that race for Eric, where he won the second run by, I don't know what, he made up 1.6 or 1.3 on me. Yeah. And I skied basically a perfect run. That to him, the problem was he didn't have the framework to accept that as something that was unbelievable. Like, right. For him, it was just really good skiing. But I think that was one of his most powerful expressions of inspiration, of purity, of himself in skiing. And you have to, I think, give that recognition in those moments. And having a framework to understand it is really valuable. Like I said, it's there's a difference, right? And there's a difference not so much in the result, because the result is what it is. Like you said, we live in an objective sport in that sense. Like, but it can be manipulated, like it was in the combined. That happened. I witnessed it. But also the experience itself is what connects you to everybody else. And so therefore what gives the meaning to it, right? Like what gives meaning to the result, but also gives meaning to the fan, gives meaning to everybody feeling like in a way they participated in the experience. And they're, you know, that's compelling, right? And that's like, it gives you a different sense of accomplishment and reward than a win does. And that's what I really liked about the sport and what I was kind of shooting for. And ideally they all match up. Like that happened there, right? Like that I got to win and I got to like really lay myself out there and do something that I think, hopefully inspired young kids who I didn't know and were just there and watched it and got to see it. But in the same context, it moves outside of the sport. Like there was adults there. There was adults who aren't ski racers there who felt really kind of like touched and connected, and that impacts the rest of their life. So like I said, it's more about overall than it is about the sport, the way that I was trying to do it. And that's what I mean is that, the results that I had in the sport were fine. I'm happy with how I ran my career. But, people have asked like, you could have won other races if you'd done differently. And I was like, yeah, but what would the difference have been between 33 and 43 or 53 or whatever the number would be, compared to the impact that I felt like I had, whether that's real or not. Like that's what I felt like I had. I felt like I gave something to the world and reciprocated both ways, like the world gave me motivation and inspiration as well. So I feel like my job was to try to contribute what I could. And that was not done through winning 2 more races or whatever. It was done through the way that I expressed myself and taking the risk that I did in the face of adversity, because that kind of triggers something in the human mind that like is unique. Like people need to see that, and they need to see that it's, sometimes it can be rewarded. And even when it's not, all you do is pick your ass up and try again.
Kobe Bryant had said something about loving to win or hating versus hating to lose. Like he was asked about this, whether he loved to win or hated to lose. And he said, I'm neither. I play to figure things out. He talked a lot about being dead center in the moment. And like you talk a lot about this, and it's sort of how our brains work under pressure. Did you, like the ideal is to not fall on that spectrum at all. You're not loving to win or hating to lose. But was there ever a time where you felt like that actually did get in the way? Because for me, sometimes this feels it seems very simple, but then it sometimes feels very intertwined. Like how can you be so focused in that moment for the best output you can have, but then when you care enough to do it at all, and maybe the reason you care is innately tied to some kind of performance or result that you might be striving to achieve, but maybe it's not. Like, was there ever a point where those got mixed up in your head?
100%. Yeah, it happened. It wasn't uncommon, actually. And like I said, I don't know that I don't think anybody has one fixed position on that spectrum of like hating to win. Like, I think you're always moving around, and ideally, like you said, you're kind of existing in the middle space where it's not a factor. Whether you're on the spectrum still or not, it's not a factor in how you feel and how you express yourself in that situation. I mean, I don't think you can eject yourself from the spectrum and just disappear.
Yeah, totally.
because you are in existence, and theoretically you're just on that spectrum somewhere. But the way it affects how you do things and where your thoughts are, where your emotions are, where your heart's at, is and for me it was always a battle. But I don't think it was specifically like where I was on the spectrum. It was just how I expressed in the moment. Like it was kind of like I would have I would have moments where I felt like I pushed too hard, almost like irresponsibly past where I needed to be, just because I was like, whether I was mad or I was petulant or I was just like, frustrated or whatever it was, like I'd just go do something stupid. And those were frustrating because that's not my expression. That's not pure. I mean, I guess it is because I'm expressing that I'm being a baby about it, but it's not the right kind, right? It's not the purest version.
It's not what you've been shooting for.
No. Yeah. And I think the irony is that when you look back, those are humanizing moments too, right? Like both for yourself to reflect on, like, okay, like they're humbling because you're like, okay, I am a baby and I got bigger and I learned how to talk and that's it. Like, of course I still have elements of being a baby in there, but they're also really, I think can be useful for other people, right? To see you in your failure or in your not optimal, right? Like, and that's a part of the give and take, right? You can't just express yourself purely and expect it always to be awesome, right? That's not realistic. And it's not, I don't think that would help either. I don't think it would help you as a person to grow. And I don't think it would be reciprocal with people. They need to see both. And so, it's just natural that happens and occurs, but it was always, that's literally an everyday thing. And it doesn't end after ski racing. It's like, you have to kind of always be aware of that. Like, where am I on my motivational spectrum, and how purely am I affecting the world around me? And that's, it sounds pretty esoteric, but it's still true. Like, and it's, like I said, skiing for me was such a great template to develop that understanding and kind of hone it in and try to figure out, like, what are indicators of when I'm heading in a path where I'm going to start being more of a baby and a brat or petulant, or, and how can I sort of shift that and, like, move it back to a more productive, impactful position.
So when you think about ski racing, how would you define the greatest of all time term? Or, like, I've been pretty outspoken that I think it's silly. Do you think a greatest of all time can exist? Is that, like, based on what's on paper? Is it subjective?
No, of course. You define the measurement stick, right? Like, and it's always different. Like, for me, there's categories that I sort of relate to personally. And of course, I recognize that, and in my opinion, you're the greatest of all time, but that's in a context of, of objectivity, in a sense, right? Like, I don't, it's not purely objective. I'm not just saying because of the wins, the number of wins, which is, like, a really clear, easy, if you had to define it down to, like, one measuring stick, right? Like, you're racing against the best in the world and you've won more times than everybody else. So, like, that's an easy one, but I like the nature of not picking a superlative in one dimension or corridor, because I just don't think that's the way life works. It's certainly not the way the sport works in my mind. I think that winning in 5 events is the thing that I'm sort of the most proud of in my mind, and not just that, but, like, not winning one slalom and everything else. Like, I was pretty consistent across the board, and my output and my effort into each event was really good. Like, in one way, that categorizes me as either the best in the world, because no one else has won in 5 times in all the events or not. But again, that's like, you're trying to parcel down to, like, get the category to fit me, like, in a way, right? Is it's logical? Yeah, I could make a case that there's a logical component to that if you're talking about the best ever, it has to be broad. It has to encompass the whole sport, right? Like, because if you're just in one part of the sport, then, like, what are we talking about?
Then it's not the sport,
right? If you'd only won slaloms, but you'd won 200 slaloms, are you the best ski racer of all time? No, you're the best slalom skier of all time by far,
right?
But even within that, there's all the subcategories that, like, might matter to one person but don't matter to somebody else. So, I just think that there is a component within that has to be sort of about the purity of the sport, the representative, how well did you represent the sport? Because that, to me, even though that's a completely subjective category, I do think it's, like, it's really important that plays a part in it, because that's about how that person affects the rest of the world within the sport, right? You're not racing in a silo, you're racing all over the place, and how you impact other people, I think, has to be considered when you're talking about greatest of all time.
Yeah. That's so true.
I'm the greatest crasher of all time, and that is a fact. I crashed more than everybody else by a lot, and more spectacularly in most cases. And you stood up
also a lot more often.
And then I also didn't crash when I thought I was going to, or when everyone else thought I was going to, and then I did crash when no one thought I was going to. So it's like I really mixed it up. I covered all the bases.
That's so real. That's so true. No, I mean, I think that the beauty of sport is that everybody gets to watch and decide what their own parameters are for the greatest. So that's, part of the inspiration for the question is
Yeah, it's one of the dumbest.
can't
It's one of
be
the
one
dumbest debates.
undisputed.
Yeah, it's one of the dumbest debates there ever
Right?
is, and everybody likes to engage in it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the greatest of all time is who impacted you the most individually. So, like, each person would have a vote, and they'd say who impacted. That would be ultimately the best, right? Is if you could survey the entire globe and say who impacted you the most in the sport. That would be
Well,
equally
then
as
you are
equally
most
as
definitely
dumb.
the greatest.
It'd be equally as dumb, but it would give you another parameter that would probably be more democratic.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point. One of the moments of like my childhood that I bragged about the most often was that my dad did your anesthesia for at least one of your surgeries. And some of the footage of you guys interacting in the hospital was used for the Flying Downhill documentary. You were also my dad's favorite racer. And then when my mom and I were flying home after my dad's accident, we randomly crossed paths with you at the Munich airport. Like, I would totally understand if you don't remember that specific moment, but I was wondering if you do.
The anesthesia or the airport?
The airport. I hope.
I remember both of them. I remember both of them, actually.
Well, you were awake for that surgery, so.
Yeah, no, I remember. And it was you'd been racing like right before our training, maybe, and you were kind of close to where I was because I was down in Italy. I was by Paganella, and then I went up to Innsbruck and stayed there, and then was flying out the next day, and yeah, I wasn't thinking anything specific. I was just heading back home, and yeah, and I was in the airport, and I was just sitting there, and I think I just kind of looked up and saw you guys, and it was like right when I saw you, like I probably was just gonna like get up and come say hi, maybe, but then as I was standing up, I could just see that like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, visually not see, but I could see that you guys were like hurting. Yeah, you were hurting in some way, but it wasn't like it was specific. Like there's different things that like I would say I got more sensitive to throughout my career, but then also post, like you said, losing a child and just kind of the dynamic nature of my experience. Like I do notice that. Like I wouldn't say I'm super perceptive in that way, but like that one was pretty obvious, and like so I went over and I was just kind of I didn't have any plan. I just came over and just gave you guys a hug, and I didn't understand what was going on, but that's I think part of the great thing about life is you don't have to understand. You just have to, if you recognize something, being there and just I guess supporting is all that's necessary.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was wondering if it's been 5 years since my dad passed. 7 since me. Has the way that you honor her memory changed since the first year, 2, 3 years? Has it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's one way. That's I think also kind of it's not one dimensional, right? Like it impacts different parts and different actions and thoughts and feelings in different ways. I mean, there's a lot of continuity between sort of the concept of inspiration or effort and her. Like, I sort of convert or alchemize grief or loss into action and motivation and I try to do it where you just kind of move it into a positive space and let it impact things, because it is a constant source of energy if you think of it that way, right? Grief is frustrating and can be heavy and shitty, but it's also it's a strong emotional force, and it has the capability to move things. So I just kind of shifted over into something more positive. That's the most consistent use of sort of honoring her memory, but yeah, it's circumstantial. It depends on where it's applied, and I would say the super consistent is just my my effort to engage with my kids all the time. I think it's kind of a challenge because there's a fear of loss, right? Like, part of the background of that, like when I used her memory and that loss to invest all my time and all my energy that I can into my kids, just little simple things like they want to go do something and I'm tired, or I'm watching a football game and like they want to go, and I'll try to I'll make the effort to get up and do that, is like the undercurrent of that is that potentially they could be gone the next day. Right. Potentially. Yeah. And so that's like, it's hard to separate those into without having sort of scar tissue or fear or baggage, because then the engagement is screwed up. Like you can't engage purely if that's kind of your concern or that's like your motivation. But yet it's a fact, and it's a reality that that I'm familiar with because it happened, where like, but I think it's an ongoing challenge. Everybody has to deal with it in one way or another. It's just, you have to deal with it in a very extreme way. And so do I. And, it is challenging because of the dynamic nature of it, right? Like you can easily, you forget that alchemizing is not like a done and done. It's not, you can take grief and you can move it over here, but like it's never going away. You're not decreasing the grief by alchemizing it into something else. It's not like you take one thing and move it. You just, this still stays the same, and you just use it over here as well, which is a strange concept, I think, for people.
It is. But I do think it's important that people hear it, and especially those who are like particularly newly experiencing loss of a loved one, that kind of pain. This like grief, it doesn't really operate on the same, like, I don't know if you call it like time-space continuum that we're used to before you experience it. And I sometimes think about it like, there's no light at the end of the tunnel because there's no real end of the tunnel, but there's like light. You learn how to light inside of the tunnel, or maybe because you're in there, you develop a better ability to see. I don't know if you have,
maybe the tunnel is a bad example of where you're living.
Maybe it's a terror.
I don't think there's a tunnel. I think the reality is it's inside of you. It's like you have a grief inside of you. That's the best. I mean, and it's outside too, but you hold it, and it's part of the honoring as well, is that you hold that, right? You hold the memory, you hold all, and trying to figure out how to organize that stuff or operate with them in an effective way where you can enjoy the really positive memories without directly connecting to the feeling of loss or sadness or whatever. And it's super, super challenging, and I think really tough to manage over a long period of time. The reality is that, it's there. And like you said, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. If you're in a tunnel, you're gonna hold on to that forever, and it's important to do that. I think you just have to try to keep in mind that everything is that way. That's just a very extreme version, right? And you wouldn't hold on to something that was having a negative impact on you, or try to you try to figure out how to not have it have a negative impact on your life and your interactions, your relationships. If it was something small, right? We all do that all the time. It's just, this is just much bigger. So it kind of has a different feel to it. But that's essentially what the alchemization of that emotion is. And like I said, it's the strange thing is it doesn't deplete it. Imagine if you could take a basket of marbles over here and you could move them over to a happy basket of marbles, and yet the marbles over here didn't get less. That's kind of
right.
It's just a weird trick of the universe, I guess.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm asked, the reason I'm doing this podcast is because what's the point? I'm often asked about legacy, and I'd be so interested to hear what you think about legacy. Do you think about legacy? Do you think about the meaning of it ever?
I mean, I think, from a concept, again, vocabulary and terminology is so
we've talked about it this whole time, but
Yeah, for me, it's about, essentially I distill it down to the simplest terms if I can. And that is, am I making a positive impact or not? Like that's what I want if you try to make it into the word legacy, I want my impact. I want my impact on the world to be that I made it better, that I tried to consistently put out that energy and impact in a positive way. Right. And like, of course I've made plenty of mistakes and done the opposite plenty of times. So, but it's not a measuring stick that way. It's more just like, again, that's sort of that back to the worrying about fear or regret or all those are distractions from the right thing, right? Like they're easy to get sucked into, but you just try to reduce the number of times and identify the situations that pull you into being shitty or doing a bad job of that. And then try to avoid those and try to like get a handle on what it feels like to operate in a positive mindset with positive thoughts and positive output as often as you can. And that's, legacy is something that doesn't end either, right? Like you've seen, for artists and musicians, legacy lasts way past their own death in a lot of cases. So, you have to think of it not as action, but as concepts, as energetic, right? Like, because the energy of somebody can live way past their death and have significant impact way beyond what their actual actions are. So that's the way I view it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about your kids in the future, is there something that stands out that you would hope they would like take into their lives in 15, 20 years that they would have learned from you, from your experiences? You talked about advice earlier, but like, is it a way of being? Is it learning how to finding something in their world that's their greatest form of self-expression? I mean,
yeah. And that's sort of why the word that I was telling you in the beginning, integrity, matters, is because, if you break the word down, it actually is internal, right? It's integrity. It's not an external thing. And so, you have to have integrity to your own belief system, to your own actions. You have to be able to have the integrity to accept and apologize and have remorse, true remorse when which is like the most time I talk about that is in that context is like I'm like, apologize to your brother. And like, man, I'm sorry. And I'm like, that's not it. You almost had it. But like,
do it again. Do it again.
And that, ironically, that's a sort of an analogy I've used for people before is like, if that's my racing right there, it's like, if I win, but I feel shitty, it's that. And if I do what I do and felt good about it and didn't win, it's that true heartfelt apology, because the idea that I didn't win isn't something I need to apologize for, but it's truly accepting, it's having the integrity to accept that was my effort and that's what I did. And that was my output at that moment. And, it's authentic and there. So, that's why that word needs so much definition, because you have to put all these pieces of context behind it to understand what it is I'm trying to express. And I think, we're getting there now. I'm sure you've watched some of the telepathy tapes and stuff. I'm so jealous of people who can communicate ideas, concepts to each other without the need for words, because words are so insufficient to really communicate anything with any complexity or any real meaning or depth, because they're so subject to interpretation, and like the way you link them together is all screwed up, and it's brutal. I've struggled with that my whole life, and I have a good vocabulary, and it's still like really insufficient for doing what I want to do. But I think the only solution I've come up with, I'm trying to become telepathic, but I haven't gotten very far yet. But I just try to put meaning, like emotional meaning and understanding behind the word, which takes a whole shitload more words. But if it's something like, where you and I, where we've experienced a lot of things together and in the same context, I can assume that you can interpret things, right? So I can just point you in the direction of this event or this situation, and I can give you a little bit of sucky definition around that, and then you can interpret it, and I have to trust that you can get something out of that, right? And that's, I think, the advantage of being expressive the way that I was, is like, that was the whole goal, was that I didn't have to use words. I could do it through my actions. I could do it through, and that was a huge breakthrough for me, was when I started to actually trust people. I started to trust that they could accept, like, good or bad. I'm sure that a million people had a million different interpretations of me and what I was doing. And that's all fine, because the reality is that it doesn't matter if they all fit into the same box, but like, you do have to trust that they are going to interpret you and going to assess and going to judge in a way. And like, that's the beauty of it, is you have to be like, all right, have at it, you know,
lay it on me, or don't, just talk about it amongst yourselves. Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for taking all this time to talk to me.
Of course, anytime. I like talking to you, and I'm impressed that you're doing this. I've been sort of poked at to do a podcast for a long time, because, as you know, I can talk. It's
a lot, though.
I can talk as long as the earth is spinning, but I don't have the confidence in it yet for some reason. I don't know why, but maybe sometime. Maybe you're going to inspire me to do one.
Well, it would be so interesting. I would love it. It's been a lot. It's been a really interesting experience, and I'm good at talking, sort of. But
what I get to ask you some questions. What's the best thing? What's the best thing you've like learned, or that's like impacted you out of it so far?
I think hearing Alice Robinson talk about, the side of the sport that I love is training. And that's probably because I feel pressure at races that I don't feel like I can control, maybe. But she was talking about racing, and she said that she loves the second run showdown, and she just like dives into it. Like, what a great experience to just be like having to rip a second run against somebody else who's going to rip a second run. And it's just a showdown, and you get to be part of that. And it was just a different take on something that I am incredibly fearful of, mostly because I don't think I'm going to match up to it. But coming into this season, I was like, okay, I can see that. And it feels kind of like, if her expression is to just like absolutely go ballistic on a second run, and to see whether or not that's going to work out, it's cool to witness that now with her, and to maybe even understand that more in what I do, and we'll kind of learn to love it a little bit more and not be afraid of it. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
that's one thing for sure.
Yeah. I think.
And then this entire conversation.
I was good at talking to people. I was good at talking to coaches and other athletes. I think I engaged more. I kind of broke that stigma a little bit between nations, where in the old days there wasn't a lot of conversations.
You don't chat.
No,
you don't talk.
No. And I was kind of, I had my own innocence, but I also was open about sharing. I didn't like hoard any advantages I thought I had, or I talked about line, I talked about tactics, I talked about equipment. And I think that kind of broke through. And it was really interesting to talk to other racers about, it's hard on the men's side. I think women are probably just inherently better at that kind of thing. In certain ways anyway, because the men, like, regardless, they always guard it a little bit, and they don't want to, talk about, but there was plenty of times where we talked about, within the team, our own team, and then also with other guys, and talked about our fears, talked about, what we really wanted to do. And it was always funny, because you could see that people like needed that, like they wanted it. They wanted to hear what everyone else was experiencing, because you're all at the start, right? And I mean, just picture like you have blinders on and you have your headphones on, like you can't, but yet everybody else is there dealing with the same sort of thing, right, in their own way.
Yeah, like
right?
Really the same experience.
Same experience, just a different lens they're looking at it through. And it was pretty awesome to I conducted my own ongoing podcast for about 15 years without recording it, and you
gotta get on it and record it.
And it was pretty cool. There was lots of times where you got really good value out of it, and then a bunch of times where you kind of, like, I would sense I would sense value, but like couldn't interpret it or couldn't apply it to my own life in any kind of meaningful way. And that was always interesting in its own right, just because I was like, wait, that doesn't really, how can I understand it? And logic makes sense, but I can't seem to like put it anywhere.
That's so interesting, actually, because I was just talking with Zrinka as well. This was another piece, you know, up and coming Croatian, and everybody's comparing her to Janica, and Janica has been kind of an advisor and coach for her over the years. But she's talking about some of the advice that she gets from Janica or from me, from anyone else. And she's like, I don't know what to do with this right now. But then as she's growing into the sport, there's moments that come up where she's then thinking, oh, I get that. Now I get that. And maybe there will be things that she never understands, or, you know, maybe there were things that you would never relate to, but it's been cool to have some conversations with her now after some of the previous races where it hasn't gone so well after a stellar season last season. And to be like, you gotta let yourself not be afraid of what might happen if you finish your best run and it's not winning yet. Like you just need to like dive back into that zone that before you were a globe winner, before like there was an expectation kind of, but how do you do that? And she's like going through a lot of growth right now, and it's so cool to see because it's going to be so impactful. But I can only say that because I've gone through a lot of similar things.
Yeah. Yeah, right. You have some perspective on it. But I think this is good what you're doing. I think the podcast is good, but I also think it's just your nature as well. So, you know, you've been pretty open and expressive with interviews, and, you know, that breaks that stigma of like being able to share things, right? Being able to actually express. And that's, like I said, that's probably why you're not as drawn to, you know, the dumb expression that I did in the sport is like, if you have different ways of doing it, then you're getting it out in a sort of broad spectrum, right? You're doing it in lots of different ways. And then you're able to manage how you do it in your sport to fit in with that bigger picture. Whereas mine, it was like everything was funneled into one little tiny hose. So it came out pretty fast.
You were in the tunnel.
Damn it.
Damn it. Get out of the tunnel. Yeah, perhaps.
Those are legacy pieces though, right? Those are impacts that stay on the sport, you know, and that's what I mean is like, when you think of legacy, it's all different. It's all scattered all over. Like certainly some of the stuff I did with line and with tactics and all that, but I would say like inside the sport, which no one else would know about, that communication and kind of just sharing and talking and being a little bit more normal than like how it was when I first rolled in there. It was like, everybody had, it was like a bunch of cliques, you know, it was like, and even within the teams, there was like cliques within, like everybody was so separate. And I was like, you know, I'd go over and sit with the Austrians, sit with the Italians and be like, hey, what's up, dudes? And they were like, oh God, what the hell's this guy doing here? And then but you know, I think that's ultimately, that's what we all sort of, if you are living in your own sort of mini world and being like, hey, this is how I want to operate, deal with it. And, you know, I think that's an authentic approach. And I think that's good that you're doing that.
Well, definitely that has kind of stayed consistent now. Like there's so much more openness. There's still separation for sure. But like, I would say that probably you did start something that's actually really impacted the sport, and people are more open. And the only reason I'm doing this now is because I feel like potentially some competitors and teammates would actually want to have the conversation, which they wouldn't have 30 years ago, for sure not. 20 years ago, probably not. 15, probably not still, you know? So that's cool. Thanks for that. And thank you so much for chatting.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been amazing. I'm so excited for people to hear this.